I should have listened to my mother, to the warnings in her voice, the fear in her eyes, but I was young and I thought I knew better. I didn't believe the stories, the ones we all laughed about as children. I didn't believe in the Neki. But now, standing in the cold, choking darkness of the forest, I knew the truth. The legend wasn't just a tale to scare children. It was real. It all started innocently enough. Just another night, another meteor shower to watch with my friends, Gareth and Mackie. The warm glow of the fire and the sounds of laughter from nearby kids filled the air as we headed to the creek. But then I saw Ain. She was with Calla, that boy who always looked at her like he wanted something. She was holding his hand as they walked towards the water, and she was going into the woods. Ain, Mackie had shouted, but she didn't respond. She disappeared into the trees with Calla, and of course we followed. The moonlight barely made it through the thick canopy of trees, and the air felt colder, heavier, as though the forest itself was alive and waiting. I wanted to turn back, but Mackie was insistent. "We can't leave her in there," he said, his voice tight with something I couldn't place. Fear, maybe. Gareth, as usual, hesitated, his mother's superstitions too strong to ignore, but he followed anyway, just as we all did. And then we heard it, the scream. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, my skin tingling with a sense of something terribly wrong. The sound was unnatural, like a child's scream that twisted and distorted into something monstrous. We ran, following Mackie as he pushed through the dense underbrush, his voice hoarse as he called her name. "Ain!" Then Gareth went down. Something heavy slammed into him, knocking him to the ground. We shone our flashlights, and that's when I saw her. Ain. But she wasn't the same. She was torn. Her hair was matted with mud, her skin scratched and bleeding. Her clothes were ripped to shreds, drenched in water. She looked like a ghost, haunted and broken. Mackie reached her first, scooping her into his arms, his eyes frantic as he searched her face. "Ain, are you okay? Did Calla do this to you?" She shook her head violently. No, Calla didn't do this." Her voice was trembling, but not from the cold. She was terrified. "We have to get out of here," she gasped, trying to push herself up. Her legs gave out beneath her, and I caught her before she fell. "Take it easy." Mackie knelt beside her, his hand on her shoulder. But she grabbed him, gripping his arms with a force that surprised me. "We have to leave. Right now," she hissed, her voice low, urgent. "It's coming." "What are you talking about?" Gareth asked, but she wasn't listening. "The Neki," she whispered. "They're real. It killed Calla." The words hit me like a blow. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to argue, to tell her it was just a story, but I couldn't. Her eyes were wide with terror, and she wasn't lying. Suddenly, a blood-curdling screech echoed through the trees, a sound that made my heart skip a beat. More followed, growing closer, louder. "It's coming!" Ain's voice was barely a whisper, but I could hear the desperation in it. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing her hand. My heart pounded in my chest as we bolted through the forest. I could hear Gareth and Mackie right behind us, their footsteps heavy, but the screeches were too close. The air felt thick, suffocating. Every breath I took felt like it could be my last. A crash from behind. Gareth. I spun around just in time to see something dark and massive hurtling toward me. It knocked me to the ground, the air knocked out of my lungs. I looked up, disoriented, only to see the gleaming white teeth of the creature coming for me. I kicked out, desperate to free myself, and managed to push it back long enough to grab a thick branch. It was beautiful, unnaturally so. A naked woman, her long white hair flowing around her like a ghostly veil, her skin pale as death. Her eyes were black, dark pits that seemed to absorb all light, and as she grinned at me, I could see the bloodstains on her lips, and then she looked at Ain. I swung the branch, hitting her across the face, but it did nothing. She barely flinched, her attention shifting back to the terrified girl in Maki's arms. Without hesitation, the Neki raced toward her, claws outstretched. "No!" I shouted, raising the branch again, but the Neki grabbed it, wrenching it from my hands and tossing it aside like it was nothing. It grabbed me by the throat, lifting me off the ground as I struggled to breathe. I gasped, clawing at her hand, but she was too strong. My vision blurred as I fought to stay conscious. In the distance I could hear Maki shouting, Gareth charging forward, but it was all fading. And then, the pain. Her teeth sank into my arm. The world exploded in agony as the sharp, jagged bite tore through my flesh. I screamed, my body trembling with the raw, excruciating pain. My vision swam with darkness, my heart racing in my chest. I felt so cold. Suddenly, the grip around my throat loosened. I fell, gasping for air as the weight lifted. Something screeched, a scream of agony, of pain unlike anything I had ever heard. I looked up, my body shaking with fear, and saw it. The Neki writhing on the ground, arrows embedded in its chest. More arrows struck it, one piercing its heart. It let out a final screech and fell silent. I could hardly believe it. The creature that had haunted my nightmares for years was dead. But I wasn't safe yet. I could feel my body failing me, the blood loss, the pain. It was all too much. But then, through the darkness, I saw her, my mother. Her emerald eyes locked with mine, and for a moment I felt like I was home. The scent of lilacs filled my nose, the same scent that always surrounded her. Soft hands caressed my face, and I could hear her voice, sweet and gentle. "Ati," I whispered, my lips trembling. "Olen pahoilani." She smiled through her tears, her hands trembling as she wiped the blood from my face. "I told you to stay out of the woods." "I know," I said, my voice barely a breath. "I'm sorry. Rest," she whispered, her voice a lullaby. And then I surrendered to the darkness. I should have known something was wrong the moment I glanced back over my shoulder, but my mind was fogged, clouded by the exhaustion, fear and despair that had gnawed at me for so long. I couldn't shake the image of my mother. Her eyes, always calm and loving, even as the sickness twisted her body. She'd pushed me out the back door, telling me to run. Run. I did, but I didn't get far before everything fell apart. The world was already crumbling, and I was too slow to understand it. I ran because I had to, because she told me to. I was no hero, no warrior, just a boy running for his life. The forest was my escape, its frozen breath brushing against my skin, the trees towering above me like silent witnesses to the horrors unfolding behind me. As I ran through the darkened woods, the sound of the keening pipe reached me. Its melody was so absurdly cheerful, it made my skin crawl. It shouldn't have been there. Not after what had happened, not after the flames, the screams, the slaughter. But it was there, cutting through the cold like a hot knife through butter. The music wrapped around me, invaded my body, seeped into my bones, pulling me forward. With every step I felt warmer, stronger, as if the very tune itself was giving me the strength to keep going. It was almost too much to bear, the way the music seemed to fill me like I was being force-fed comfort, the kind of comfort I'd lost the moment my mother pushed me away. The world felt strange, unreal, as if I were a puppet tied to a string forced to dance on the whim of that distant tune. I had heard the screams earlier, but now they seemed so far away. The fires were a memory, the blood staining the streets fading as I ran deeper into the woods. My feet barely touched the snow, gliding through it like some spectre. The wind whipped through the branches, and above, the sky seemed to split open, as if the gods themselves were having some terrible cosmic fight. The snow fell, soft and light like a curse, but I barely noticed it as the music wrapped tighter around me. Then I saw him. He was there just ahead of me, moving through the trees like a shadow. His figure appeared, vanished, reappeared, always ahead or beside, never behind. His cloak, black, hooded, billowed behind him like something alive, shifting in the wind. Beneath it, his clothes were a riot of colour, patches of red, green, yellow, blue, all stitched together in a chaotic patchwork. And then his pipe, the source of that maddening, beautiful melody. The bone-white fingers danced along the instrument as he played, the notes sharp and clear, a song of promises, of life restored, of things fixed. I stumbled, but somehow kept my feet. The snow didn't leave any marks beneath me, not mine, not his. We were ghosts, the two of us, moving through the forest as if it were a dream. The music pressed in on me, seeping into every part of me. Run, the melody seemed to say. Run faster, run longer, run to me. So I ran. I ran because I wanted to believe it. I wanted to believe in the world the song promised. A world of sunlight, where the snow melted and the sun kissed my skin. A world where my mother's skin was soft again, free from the sores and the agony that had consumed her. Where my father would laugh again, his face full of colour, his hands strong around mine. Where my brothers and sisters were alive and healthy, teasing me as they always had, pulling me close when I cried, tucking me in at night. A world where I would grow old, weathered but content, surrounded by love, warmth, and laughter. I ran faster, faster than I'd ever thought possible. The trees blurred, the snow became a whirl of white around me, and I could see him clearly now. The piper standing just ahead, his face hidden beneath his hood. His movements were smooth, graceful, like a dancer caught in a perpetual waltz. And I was his partner, drawn to him, moving with him. I wanted to reach him, to touch him, to surrender to him. And then I realized something that stopped me dead in my tracks. The snow beneath us had no footprints, none, not his, not mine, not. I froze, panic crawling up my spine, a cold sweat breaking out on my brow. I looked around, my breath coming in quick gasps. The trees, the snow, the piper who had never touched the ground. Number I had been following him. I had been running toward him, believing in him, but now I saw the truth. The music, the warmth, the promises, they weren't real. They couldn't be. The piper, he wasn't leading me to salvation. He was leading me somewhere far worse. He was a predator, and I was the prey. A moth drawn to a flame, and now I could feel the heat rising, burning me from the inside. And then he turned to face me. His face was hidden beneath the hood, but there was something wrong about the way he moved, something predatory in his grace. The bone-white fingers of his hands gripped the pipe tightly, and the music slowed, almost deliberately, the notes now aching and hollow. It was no longer a song of promises, it was a song of death, of lost souls trapped in a world of their own making. The piper stepped closer, and I knew then. I wasn't running toward freedom. I was running toward him, toward a fate I couldn't escape. And as he moved closer, the melody played on, sweeter than ever. Run, little boy, run to me. Jagged white flakes tumbled from the sky, blanketing the earth like an endless veil. They collected on the pile of firewood beneath the frosted window, the last remaining source of warmth since the power had long since gone out. The fire was their only hope. Without it, they would be swallowed by the cold, left to fade into the night like forgotten shadows. I pulled my hand from the back of the faded puke-green couch, leaving my fingertips tingling from the effort. The living room sprawled out before me, spacious, silent, and utterly untouched. A circular rug lay between me and the stone hearth, a recliner to my left, and oak shelves on the far wall, their contents, antique cookbooks, dusty trinkets, a tiny wooden train, seemingly frozen in time. This was the kind of place you could lose yourself in, the kind of place you could stay forever, if it weren't for the whispering wind, the secrets buried beneath the snow, and the feeling that something was wrong. Viola appeared in the doorway from one of the back rooms, her arms loaded with mugs, a hot pad, and an oversized reusable bag. A faint fragrance of vanilla and something more unsettling mingled with the scent of charred timber. The light from her phone flickered against her cheek as she spoke. I found cocoa. It's peppermint. Your favorite. I frowned, fighting the urge to snap back at her. No, it's yours. Treats should never taste like toothpaste. But I didn't say that. Instead, I dropped to the floor, sinking into the plush rug, trying to ignore the growing unease in my chest. Great, I muttered, forcing a smile. Viola set the kettle on the stone hearth, the ruby pendant around her neck catching the firelight with every move. As she poured the hot cocoa into the mug, steam rose from the liquid, curling and twisting around her fingers like smoke from a fire long dead. I picked up my mug, its flowery porcelain delicate in my hands. What kind of 90-year-old woman lives this far out, has backup cocoa but not a generator? I asked, taking a sip. The minty burn of the cocoa seared my tongue. I think it's sweet, Viola said with a shrug. Kinda reminds me of my gran, but less racist. I didn't know the woman who had hired us to house sit for the weekend. I hadn't even met her before arriving at this secluded mountain cabin. But the check was generous, and Viola had insisted that we go, despite my misgivings. It'll be fun, she'd said. No one ever comes up here, just us and the snow. But I knew something was wrong, and the longer we stayed, the more I could feel it. The air was thick with unease. We'll be fine, she added, rummaging in the grocery sack. She'll be back to take us down the mountain tomorrow morning. And hey, she paused, pulling out 2 bags of marshmallows. Your choice, small coloured ones or big ones. Pastels, I muttered, my stomach growling as I accepted them. Good choice! Viola's voice bubbled with cheer, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Her smile was too wide, too strained, as if she were trying to convince herself that everything was fine. She tossed a marshmallow in her mouth, and the only sound for a while was the crackling of the fire and the wind battering against the cabin. The storm outside was intensifying. I sipped the cocoa, the minty warmth creeping through my body. but it did little to calm the tightening in my chest. My eyes kept drifting to the window, the snow that blurred the world outside, and the strange sensation that we were not as alone as we'd hoped. A sound broke through the quiet, the unmistakable rumble of an engine, a loud mechanical whine that sent a chill down my spine. I leapt to my feet, pressing my hands against the glass, trying to see through the fogged window, but there was nothing. No headlights, no truck in the driveway, just the endless stretch of snow, the trees, and that feeling that something was wrong. The noise cut off as suddenly as it had come. My heart pounded in my chest, and then I saw it. A shadow. Not the kind of shadow cast by a passing animal, but something alive. It moved, slithering across the ground, stretching from the base of a tree to the next in one unnatural bound. I couldn't breathe. "Did you see that?" I whispered, my voice strangled. "That shadow." It moved. Viola hesitated, her eyes shifting toward the window. "Maybe a raccoon jumping between branches," she suggested, but there was a tremor in her voice, something I hadn't noticed before. A part of me didn't believe her. Raccoons didn't leap like that, and if they did, it certainly wouldn't be in the dead of winter. Viola turned back to the fire, brushing it aside with a shrug. "It's fine. I'll get more wood in a minute." But when she glanced toward the woodpile, her face fell. "We're down to 2 logs," she muttered. "No, wait, make that one and a handful of sticks." A cold wave of fear gripped me, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. The tinderbox had been full not 10 minutes ago. I knew that much. "We could just go to bed," I suggested, my voice barely a whisper. Viola met my eyes, her smile faltering as she stood, her coat already on. "Come on, it's only 7, and we don't need power to have fun." I opened my mouth to protest, but nothing came out. Something told me that going outside right now was a bad idea, but before I could speak, Viola had grabbed the flashlight, the phone light flickering weakly in the growing dark. "I'll be back in a minute," she said, her voice too steady, too forced. The door creaked as she pulled it open, and a gust of cold air rushed inside, stealing the warmth from my bones. Snow crunched beneath her boots, but once the door slammed shut, the world went silent. Too silent. I could no longer hear her footsteps, only the howling wind, the desperate cry of the storm outside. I glanced out the window again, my chest tight, my breath catching in my throat. The smell hit me first, a rancid, cloying stench like rotting gingerbread seeping through the cracks of the cabin. I gagged, pressing my hand to my mouth, but it didn't help. The scent filled the room, curling around me like a sinister fog. The darkness outside shifted. At first I thought it was the wind, but no, it was too deliberate, too alive. I stared, my heart racing, as dark red patches began to stain the snow outside. Not rain, blood. With a wet, sickening plink, a mangled hand landed on top of the woodpile. I screamed, stumbling back from the window. "Viola!" The word was barely a whisper, a question, but it hung in the air like a death sentence. My pulse thundered in my ears, drowning out everything else. A sudden rattling at the door. I jumped, my gaze snapping to the knob. I grabbed the poker from beside the hearth, my fingers cold, numb against its iron surface. The doorknob twisted, I tightened my grip, the door opened, and there she was. The old woman. Her grey wisps of hair hung loose around her face, her back hunched beneath layers of thick dark cloth. Her eyes glinted, too bright in the dark. her lips parted in a grin that didn't belong on a face so aged, so worn. Jagged, blood-soaked teeth glistened in the dim light, and there, resting on her chest, was Viola's ruby pendant, glinting in the firelight. My breath caught in my throat. The air around me seemed to shudder, as if reality itself was warping. She stepped inside, smoke rising from her withered form, swirling around her like a second skin. The poker rattled in my hands, but I couldn't move. The world seemed to stop, the flames flickering in the hearth, the darkness swallowing the room whole, and then there was only silence. The storm was unrelenting. It pounded the small stone house outside Corinth like a wrathful god, the wind howling through the cracks, shaking the very foundations of the walls. Yet inside, I couldn't hear the storm. All I could feel was the heat of him beside me. His body, powerful and warm, radiated an energy that wrapped around me like a cocoon, making me feel as if the world outside was nothing but an illusion. "Zeus, my Zeus," whispered sweetly into my ear, his voice thick with sleep. "You, more than any other mortal, have captured my heart." His fingers traced the line of my cheek, the touch sending a shiver down my spine. "My heart is yours, now and forever, my lord," I murmured, my lips grazing his jaw as I pressed a kiss to his face, feeling the roughness of his stubble against my skin. I could barely contain the warmth blooming in my chest. I had always been known for my beauty, my golden hair, my sun-kissed skin, the envy of every mortal in the village. But none of it mattered now. I was his, and he was mine. Zeus smiled, a lazy, contented smile, his muscular arm tightening around me, pulling me closer. "For you and only you, my love," he said softly. "I am not your lord. I am your love." The heat between us grew, electric, until the kiss deepened, slow and hungry. The world outside the storm, outside of time, faded away as we lost ourselves in each other. Then came the voice, cold, cutting through the haze of passion like a blade. "So this is where you have been sneaking off to, my darling husband." The voice was sharp, venomous, and filled with a cruel mockery. We both jumped, the sudden intrusion shocking our senses. Zeus's hand went to the hilt of his divine power as he leaped from the bed, his eyes flaring with anger. "Who dares disrupt us?" he demanded, his voice thunderous. The shadows in the room seemed to recoil as his power filled the space. But then his eyes, wide with shock and recognition, softened. "Hera," he whispered, his anger replaced by something darker. Emerging from the deepest shadows was a vision. She glowed with an ethereal light, her beauty transcendent. Hera, queen of the gods. Her fiery red and gold hair cascaded down her back like a river of flames, her white robe clinging to her athletic form as she glided into the room. She was beautiful, divine, but her eyes, those eyes, they were filled with scorn. "Do you not recognize your wife, O mighty Zeus?" she asked, her voice dripping with disdain. Zeus scowled. "What is the meaning of this, Hera?" "I should ask you that, Zeus," she sneered, her gaze sweeping over me with disgust. "You have the audacity to feign anger at me, after all you've done." She stepped closer, her presence cold and suffocating, the warmth that had surrounded us suddenly turning to ice. "You, who have left the world with more bastard children than can fill a temple in my honor, and to debase your godhood by laying with this mere mortal." She spat the word mortal as if it were poison. You should feel shame. I could feel my heart sink. I wanted to speak, to defend myself, but her words cut me deeper than any physical wound. And then I felt the pressure of her gaze, an invisible weight upon my chest. You forget your place, Hera, Zeus said, stepping forward, his voice low and dangerous. I am the king of the gods. You will show me the respect I deserve. His anger was palpable, but it wasn't enough to mask the tension between them. Save the melodrama for Olympus, Hera said with a flick of her hand. You and I know very well that we are equals, and I will show you just how much. Before I could even react, Hera was by the bed, pushing past Zeus with a force that sent him stumbling back. I clutched the white sash around my waist, suddenly feeling naked under her gaze. My goddess, forgive me. I didn't mean... I stammered, but my voice faltered under her cold, judging stare. Hera's eyes glinted with a cruel amusement. I pity you, mortal, but your life was never meant to be. Now it ends. She reached out, her delicate fingers brushing against my forehead. Pain exploded inside my skull. It was unbearable. My skin felt as though it was tearing, my bones cracking and shifting under the pressure of some dark magic. A scream ripped from my throat as my body twisted, reshaping itself against my will. My hair fell out in clumps, my ears elongated, sharp as knives. My teeth grew longer, sharper, as my very humanity was ripped from me in a horrific transformation. Zeus! I cried, but my voice was no longer my own. It was rough, guttural. Zeus, help me! But the god I loved only stood there, paralyzed with grief, his face stricken with horror as I began to twist, to contort into something monstrous. His eyes met mine for the last time, and I saw the heartbreak in them. I wasn't his beautiful mortal any longer. I was something else, something dark. When I awoke, I wasn't in the house anymore. The world around me was different, darker, and yet it felt familiar. The cave was damp and cold, but it didn't matter. It was the feeling that gripped me. Something was wrong. Everything was wrong. I had woken to the sound of something stirring nearby. Iris, I gasped, the name slipping from my lips in a breathless whisper. The air around me thickened, and before I could rise, pain shot through my head. I winced as the edges of reality seemed to blur, but then, her, Iris, she was there. But she was different. No longer the sweet, comforting woman I had known. Her beauty was gone, replaced by something unrecognizable. She was standing before me now, glowing. Yes, but in a way that made my stomach turn. Her eyes, they weren't hers. They were red, burning with a demonic hunger. And then, in an instant, her lips were on mine. But it wasn't her kiss. Iris? My voice was shaking, a whisper of disbelief. The woman pulled away and I saw the horror in her twisted grin. More clever than most, she growled, the words slipping from her throat like poison. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I pushed myself away from her, panic surging in my veins, my mind scrambling for answers, but there was nothing. Only this thing. The creature standing in front of me, in her form, her body splitting apart, her mouth opening wider and wider, as if she were unhinging her jaw. I screamed. I tried to run, but the cave around me seemed to close in, trapping me. I can smell it, the thing hissed, its voice echoing in the cave. The child has begun growing inside you. I turned, desperate to find Iris, my Iris, but she was sitting against the rock wall, her eyes wide with terror. I was going to tell you, Iris said, her voice trembling. I didn't know how. Suddenly everything crashed into place. The creature's laughter rang in my ears, but I couldn't focus on that. I couldn't focus on anything but the words that were coming from Iris's lips. I'm pregnant, Quinn. I froze. My world, my reality, shifted. The woman I loved was carrying my child. In this nightmare, this hell we had found ourselves trapped in, there was a sliver of hope. But then, as I tried to approach, the creature struck. It leaped toward Iris, its black tongue darting out, licking the side of her face. And before I knew it, I was moving. My body didn't think. It only acted. I threw myself in front of Iris, pushing her away from the creature just as its jaws snapped. Its teeth sank into my side, and the pain was like nothing I had ever known. No! Iris screamed. I gasped, blood filling my mouth as I crumpled to the ground. I tried to speak, to tell her that I loved her, but the words failed me. My blood soaked the cave floor as the creature stood over me, its eyes gleaming. Why? It hissed. Why would you sacrifice yourself for her? Because I love her, I managed to say. My breath laboured, the life draining from me. I love her more than anything. The creature's expression twisted in confusion, as though it couldn't comprehend what I had done. Then, as if in answer, it shrieked, a piercing wail that echoed through the cavern. The light around us grew, brighter and brighter, until I could barely see. And then a figure appeared, a man, glowing, his presence overwhelming. I am Zeus, he said, and everything stopped. Time, the pain, the creature, it all stood still. What happened next was nothing short of miraculous. The creature before us, this monstrosity, began to change, to shed its hideous form. The horror faded, replaced by something beautiful. Lamia, the woman I had once been, now freed from the curse. Zeus smiled, wiping the blood from her lips, his voice full of both regret and reverence. You have freed her, mortals, he said softly, looking down at me, his eyes filled with a tenderness that didn't match his earlier anger. You have broken the curse. And just like that, the nightmare was over. What am I supposed to do? I've been frantically searching, desperately trying to find the hidden catch that once led to the secret passageway, but it's gone now. The wall, it's solid. It wasn't like this before. The painted surface that had once concealed an escape route is now smooth, seamless, like it was never there at all. I can barely hide the panic clawing at my chest as I feign casualness, pretending to drink from my glass of water while my other hand reaches behind me, groping the edges of the painted surface, hoping, praying that I'll find something, anything. But there's nothing. The passage is gone, cut off, as though it never existed. I force myself to keep calm. I glance into the mirror, running my hands through my hair, tossing my head in what I hope is a nonchalant gesture, all the while scanning the room for any new exit, any new escape plan. The fear gnaws at me, eating away at my resolve. I have to stay calm. I must. Outside the glass doors of the balcony, I feel it before I see it. A presence, a looming shadow. I don't even have to look closely to know what it is. I can sense him, like some dark, predatory force watching me from the night. When I finally steal a glance, I almost freeze in place. There, crouched like some ancient, beastly guardian, is a giant man. His head is completely bald except for a stringy, dishevelled ponytail hanging limp at the back. His body is monstrous. Thick, bulging muscles strain against his tight white t-shirt, his arms crossed firmly across his chest, as though daring me to try anything. He's so massive, so intimidating, that his neck seems to have disappeared into his shoulders, swallowed up by his overwhelming physique. His gaze is unblinking, steady, unnerving. His eyes are sharp, slanted, and dark. A twisted part of my mind wonders if he's Japanese, some kind of terrifying sumo wrestler. But no, not now. Not like this. He's been there since sunset, squatting, unmoving, watching. And I feel it. His eyes never leave me, never flicker, never stray. Every move I make, he's aware. And I know, deep down, that any attempt to escape through those balcony doors is futile. There's no running from him. I don't dare look at the door leading into the corridor. It's a thick oak door, solid, imposing. But could it be open? Could I get out of here? I force myself not to betray a flicker of hope. The big man is watching everything. My only choice is to move with the quietest, most calculated movements I can muster, even as panic claws at my throat. I pretend to admire the hideous watercolours hanging on the walls, cheap, faded scenes of forests and coastlines, an inch closer to that door. Please let it be open, please. Then wham! I don't have time to react. The big man is suddenly standing right in front of me, blocking the door. He hasn't moved, hasn't made a sound, but somehow in the blink of an eye he's there. His face splits into a grin that is all wrong, too smug, too triumphant. He's towering over me, his arms still crossed, like he's already won. Over 2 meters tall, and in that moment I know, he's not just a man, he's a predator. I can't retreat, that would be a fatal mistake. It's now or never. I have to push forward, I have to. My mother's words echo in my head, sharp and clear, as if she's standing next to me even though I know she isn't. Never be afraid of anyone, babe. You can do anything if you really want to, you know. With shaking hands, I reach for the door handle, trying to steady myself. My heart pounds so hard, it feels like my chest is going to burst. The noise in my ears is deafening. The ticking clock, the hum of the heater, the distant sounds of traffic, everything fades away into an eerie silence as I inch my fingers toward the cold metal. I brace myself. No impact. I blink, disoriented. I don't understand what I'm seeing. My hand goes right through him, right through his form. He's not solid. He's a shadow, a nightmare. My heart stops in shock. I yank down the handle, the door swinging open with a weightlessness that shouldn't be possible. It slams open and I stagger through it, stumbling toward freedom. But then, the laugh. That laugh. It's the worst thing I've ever heard. It's not a belly laugh, not a chuckle. It's the kind of sinister, gleeful snigger that a cat might make as it toys with a mouse circling before the kill. It ricochets off the walls, a vile, haunting sound that sends a wave of icy dread through my veins. I don't care where I'm going, I just run. I don't know where I'm headed, but I'm desperate to get away. There's a long, sterile hallway ahead of me. White walls, white floors, cold, clinical. It's too quiet, the silence too oppressive. The air feels thick, as if the walls are swallowing the sound of my footsteps. I almost miss the turn, barely catching myself on the wall as I whirl around a corner, heart hammering in my chest. A staircase looms before me. Do I go up? Do I go down? I don't have time to decide. He's there. He leaps from above, landing in front of me with terrifying grace. He's on all fours, his eyes, black, gleaming, hunting, fixated on me with a gaze so cold it feels like it could freeze me in place. My body locks up, my limbs refusing to move. I can't look away. It's like being trapped in a nightmare, unable to wake up. He crawls closer. I am paralyzed. His eyes are so deep, so dark they swallow every ounce of hope I had left. And then, just as I think I might escape, I hear the telltale sound of him lunging toward me. I scream. He has me. I feel his icy fingers around my neck, squeezing, tightening, cutting off my breath. Panic surges through me, the fight for survival rising up from some primal place. My nails find his face, raking across the smooth skin of his cheek, drawing blood. He roars in rage, but his grip doesn't loosen, it tightens, the darkness consumes me. The world spins, there's no air, no sound, only blackness, and then light, brightness. I gasp, disoriented, as if waking from a dream. I blink, and the familiar shape of a photo frame beside my bed comes into focus. I'm back in my room. The normality of it almost soothes me. Almost. My heart is still hammering. My head is pounding. I stumble to the bathroom, desperate to shake off the remnants of the terror. I splash water on my face, but as I look up into the mirror, something freezes me in place. The bruising around my neck, deep, angry purple and red, marking where his hands had been. My fingers tremble as I touch the raw, swollen skin, wincing in pain. But something's wrong. Something's off. I glance at my hands. There's blood under my nails, thick, sticky, blackened. What is happening? Then the terror comes crashing back. That feeling, that presence. It's in the bathroom with me. I turn slowly, dread creeping up my spine. And there, by the shower, is him, the big man. His face now marked by the scratches I left him, twisted into that same smug, horrifying grin. He's crouched there, waiting. No, this can't be real. This can't be happening again. But it is. The door to the garden. It's not my garden. It's a thick, oppressive bamboo forest, the stalks towering over me like grotesque giants. I try to push forward, but my legs are tangled, stuck in the dense mass of vegetation, the tendrils wrapping around me like iron chains. I scream, but my voice is muffled, swallowed by the suffocating greenery. And then, the laughter. It's all around me, suffocating, drowning me. I scream again, louder this time. I wake up. Or do I? I try to breathe, but the pressure builds. The laughter is louder, closer. The door handle is moving. Number, please, no. It's happening again. Shut up, I hissed at the trees, barely able to keep the panic from boiling over. I'm trying not to die. They responded, but not in words, just a whisper, rustling through the leaves like a half-breath caught in the air. Fine, good enough. It wasn't like I needed reassurance from a bunch of damn trees. I looked around, fighting the panic clawing at my chest. I'd lost all sense of time. Hell, I couldn't even remember how long I'd been out here. But I wasn't going to die in these woods. I wouldn't. That thought gave me a flicker of strength, a spark of defiance that lasted all of 10 seconds before it melted into sheer confusion again. What the hell was happening? The trees stretched endlessly on either side of me, a wall of thick trunks that didn't seem to lead anywhere, didn't seem to have any purpose except to trap me. I was lost. That much I knew. I had been walking what felt like forever, following what might have been a trail, or maybe it was just my delirium talking. I saw the sun sinking behind the trees to my left. North, I thought. Yeah, sure, north. But where the hell were the exits? And more importantly, how did I get here? There were no answers, no guidance, only that incessant whispering from the trees, as if they were mocking me. I had to find higher ground, right? I'd seen enough survival movies to know that much. I'd never been much of an outdoors guy. City life was all I knew. But maybe, just maybe, if I climbed a tree or something, I could spot a way out. But these trees, tall, thick, like giants with bark that looked as if it had grown over centuries. Climbing one, not an option. That thought hit me hard. The reality of being utterly helpless in the face of nature gnawed at my bones. So I did the only thing I could think to do. I turned around. I retraced my steps, hoping to find some clue, anything, that might explain how I ended up in this God-forsaken place. A bird called out in the distance, breaking the suffocating silence. It was the only living thing I'd heard, and for a split second, I felt a flicker of relief. A bird, fine. Not a bear, not a swarm of bugs. Just a bird. I walked, the sound of my footsteps swallowed by the trees. What happened to me? I couldn't remember. My mind was a haze, a fog of half-formed thoughts. I remembered the bar. I had been at the bar just having a drink by myself. Not too much, just enough to feel loose, happy. But that feeling was fading and the edges of my memory were fraying. Then, what? Who was with me? Larry? Meg? Sharon? That name made my stomach twist into knots. Sharon, the woman who had once been my everything, until she was suddenly nothing. She had the 3 Bs, brains, body, and batshit crazy. I should have seen it, should have known it when I met her. She was too good to be true, smart, beautiful, and fiercely intense. I thought I could handle her, that I could control her, but I was wrong. God, I was so wrong. We dated, moved in together, until I screwed it all up. I remember the moment she caught me with another woman in the kitchen, that look on her face, cold, calculating. She didn't scream. She didn't even yell. She just walked out. And I just stood there like an idiot. After that, she disappeared. Completely. Vanished. No texts, no calls. Nothing. I shook the thought away as I pushed through the trees, trying to focus on the present, but the memories came rushing back. Sharon had always been unpredictable, unhinged even, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she had something to do with this. I stumbled back into the clearing where I had woken up, the same place, the same strange sense of déjà vu. Nothing, no sign of anyone. No sign of anything. I felt that prickling sensation at the back of my neck again. It was that feeling, the one you get when you know you're being watched. I stood there, frozen, when suddenly a bird called again. Or maybe it was the same bird. It sounded closer this time, like it was hovering right above me. And then it hit me. The silence. There were no other birds, no other animals, just that one relentless cry. My skin crawled. I shook my head, trying to clear the panic that was building in my chest. Focus. Focus. I had to focus. I looked around, trying to ground myself in reality. But then something caught my eye. A tree. An ordinary tree. But there, carved into the bark, was an arrow. I didn't even know why I noticed it at first, but when I did, I couldn't look away. The arrow was faint, shallow, almost like it had been scratched into the bark with a knife. It pointed down. Something had been here. Someone had been here. And I wasn't alone. Not anymore. I felt it in my bones. The air thickened. The trees murmured their ancient secrets. "Is this some fucking game?" I yelled, my voice raw with frustration. "What the hell do you want from me? Who the fuck are you?" No response. Just the whispering of leaves. I didn't care anymore. I dropped to my knees, digging through the soil beneath the tree. My hands trembled, desperation driving me forward. And then I found it. A shape. Something buried under the dirt. Something wrapped in leather. I pulled it free. The leather was soft, worn, like it had been carried for a long time. I felt a chill crawl down my spine as I saw what it was. A backpack. A small, cartoonish Darth Vader backpack. No. No. No, no, no. The memory came crashing back. Sharon. She had walked into my life again that night, so casually, so effortlessly. She'd been carrying that same backpack, and I should have known. The night we met in that damn coffee shop. "Buy me a coffee," she had said, her voice cold but alluring. "Let's talk." She didn't wait for my response. She didn't need to. She had me hooked, reeling from the moment she stepped into that dimly lit cafe. And then, after she drugged me, I woke up here. And now, this backpack was here too. I opened it slowly, my heart thudding in my chest. There was a note inside. A mirror. 2 apples. I picked up the note, barely able to see the words through my shaking hands. "The apple of discord plus the apple of temptation," it read. "Try them. While you see yourself wither away, your own true victim. Say hi to the harpy for me." My breath caught in my throat. What the hell was this? A game? A joke? The apple in my hand seemed perfect, shiny, tempting. But then the bird cried out again. The same one. Or was it something else? I looked up and my blood ran cold. The bird was bigger now, huge, unnaturally large. And it wasn't just any bird. No, this one had tits. Huge, grotesque, sagging, like some twisted mockery of a woman's body. But worse, much worse, it had a face, an old woman's face, cracked and covered in teeth. It screamed at me. I screamed back. I didn't know what was happening, what this was, but I understood one thing. This was no longer about Sharon. This wasn't about me. It was about survival. And I had no idea what would kill me first, the bird, the apples, or my own mind. The harpy continued to watch me, its eyes gleaming with an ancient, deranged hunger. The moment I stepped through the door, something was wrong. It hit me all at once, that eerie silence that filled the house. No excited squeals of "Manda, Manda," from the twins rushing to greet me. No warm hug from Mum, her voice bright as she tossed my backpack aside, asking, "Amanda, how was school today?" No teasing from Amelie, my 15-year-old sister, who usually bounded out of our room the moment I walked in, eager to show me some new thing she had discovered. No hum of the overhead fan, No sounds of life. The house was empty. The foyer, usually bustling with activity, stood still. It was an unsettling stillness that gripped my chest. This had happened before, 2 years ago, when Dad was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and they all rushed to the hospital without telling me. The same empty silence. And when I got there, he was gone. Gone. I never got to say goodbye. The thought chilled me to the core, and panic started to claw at my throat. Please, not Mom, not Mel. Oh God, not the twins. If something happens to them, I didn't know what I'd do. I turned the corner, my heart pounding, bracing myself for whatever horrible truth awaited me. But what I found was worse than anything I could have imagined. The green was gone. The green, our green, the heart of our home. It had sat proudly on the mantel for as long as I could remember, a symbol of family, of love. Dad had carved it himself, painstakingly shaping it over 3 long years. I still remember the way he'd sit by the fire at night, his hands working the clay with quiet concentration, never telling us what he was making. We never asked either. It was enough just knowing it was there. But now it was gone. Stolen. Destroyed. I couldn't comprehend it. My mind was spinning. Where is it? Who took it? Why? What are we going to do without it? A cough broke through my thoughts, and I whipped around, heart leaping into my throat. There they were, my family. My heart soared in relief. They were all right. They were standing together on the couch, staring at me with cold, empty eyes. But then I saw it. The way they were staring at me. Like they didn't see me, not really. Their eyes were glazed, their faces expressionless. I took a step back, the unease growing in my stomach. Something was terribly wrong. Before I could say anything, they all stood up at once, simultaneously. It was like they were puppets, each movement too synchronized, too deliberate. They enveloped me in a hug, too tight, too forceful. Their arms around me felt like a prison, not a comfort. I gasped, pushing them away. What's going on? What is this? Amelie, my sister, my twin, was the only one who spoke. Her voice was flat, distant, like it wasn't even hers. Nothing, dear. Just close your eyes, just as we did. Give all of your prized possessions to the king. Surrender yourself to him, just as we did. You will attain true happiness. I recoiled, my breath catching in my throat. She had never called me dear before. What was happening to her, to all of them? Who's the king? I choked out. Are you okay? Blink twice if you need my help. She didn't blink. Instead, her bony finger pointed toward the corner. My blood ran cold. There, in the shadowed corner of the living room, stood a man. He was dressed entirely in black, with a hat pulled low over his face like a shadow itself. He leaned casually against the wall, watching us, watching me. How had he gotten in? When? What the hell was going on? The moment I saw him, I knew. He was the cause of this. The terrible, suffocating feeling that had settled over everything. He was the reason everything felt wrong. Amelie's lips curved into a smile, a quick, almost painful thing, like a flicker of some forgotten memory. But the man, his smile was something else entirely. It wasn't a smile. It was predatory. It was maniacal. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't move. Something pulled at me. My body froze. My eyes locked on his, and I couldn't look away. The man slowly lifted his hat, And what I saw, I wish I could forget. It wasn't a face. There was nothing there. Just a swirling, gurgling hole. A black void. It sucked at the air, pulling everything around it into its infinite emptiness. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat, my body beginning to shake uncontrollably. And then he spoke. His voice was deep, smooth and hypnotic. "Don't go. Stay. Don't you want the truth? Don't you want peace and happiness?" His words were kind, gentle even, but they didn't match his face. They didn't match the hunger I saw behind his eyes. It was a trick, but I couldn't look away. There was something magnetic about him, something in the way he gestured to me, like a snake coiling around its prey. I felt myself drawn in, compelled. I didn't want to listen, but I did. I couldn't stop myself. Then, as if snapping me out of a trance, he snapped his fingers. Everything around me shattered into chaos. The ground beneath me began to rumble. The bamboo floorboards Dad had made years ago cracked under our feet, splitting open like an earthquake had just begun. And then, with a sickening lurch, we all fell. Down, down into the darkness. The man, the king, I suppose, hovered above us, his cruel laughter echoing in the pit, his face twisting in madness. I couldn't feel the ground anymore. The pit seemed endless. The cold, empty blackness surrounded us, suffocating. But then I saw something, a glimmer, a shimmer in the air. The green. It was floating in front of the man, a soft glowing light in the overwhelming dark. I reached for it desperately, but something was holding me back. Something was keeping me here. I couldn't get out. I couldn't reach it. My mother screamed. She was crying, her hands reaching for it, begging, screaming. Mom never cries. The last time I'd seen her like this was when Dad died. The only other time. I tried to climb out of the pit to fight against whatever force was holding me down. My body screamed in pain, but I pushed on, reaching for the green. I thought, if I can just get to it, everything will be okay. But I didn't see the man's hand fall to his side. Didn't see it raise again until it pointed directly at me. I didn't hear the zap of electricity until it was too late. The shock hit me in the forehead and everything went black. I didn't know how long I was out. It could have been hours. It could have been minutes. When I came to, I was lying on the cold floor, my head throbbing. My family was gathered around me, their faces filled with worry, but they weren't themselves. "Where is he?" I croaked. "Where is he? Where is the king?" Mum held the twins close. Mel pressed her head to mine, her warmth a weak comfort. We were together, but it didn't feel like a family anymore. It felt like we were stuck in this place, this thing, and I knew somehow, deep down, that we would never leave. We were together, and we always would be. Fo's kids in high school spent their summers at the pool or on some vacation, but I preferred the library. And not just any library. No, this place was a museum of old memories, a labyrinth of crumbling paper, forgotten births and death certificates, all catalogued in dusty drawers that creaked like the floorboards of some haunted mansion. The smell was a blend of must, stale coffee, and something older, something ancient that whispered of stories long past. The ceiling above groaned every now and then, as if a ghost was shifting its weight in the attic, and I loved it. Every inch of it. That's where I first came across Cyril Aberforce. At first it was just the name that caught my eye, so strange, so old-fashioned. Cyril Aberforce. The man's name could have been written in the pages of a Gothic novel, but no, it was real. His story was real, and it was the bold, ugly words murderer, convicted, that followed his name in the newspapers that yanked me in deeper. In April of 1838, Cyril Aberforce was found in a pool of his wife's blood. The kitchen was soaked in it. Maggie Aberforce, his wife, his only relative for miles, was dead, a butcher's knife still clutched in Cyril's trembling hand. They were both in their 60s, childless, living on a farm too far from town for anyone to hear the screams. The newspapers called it a tragedy born of a drunken rage. Aberforce had a reputation for drinking himself into madness during bad harvest seasons, and that year's rains had failed him. They speculated that he'd gone out of his mind, fueled by moonshine and frustration. But some accounts were darker. Some suggested a demon had overtaken him, punishing him for sins buried deep in his past. I couldn't find much more about those sins, though. The records were scarce, slipped through the cracks of time. That was expected. This was the 1800s after all. History wasn't neatly packed into boxes back then. It was fragmented, forgotten. But still, I couldn't let it go. I couldn't believe a man would murder his wife, not in the way they described it. And then there was the strangest thing. Cyril swore he hadn't killed her. He claimed he'd found Maggie in the blood, lying on the floor. Distressed, he'd laid beside her, clutching the knife until someone found them. I couldn't stop thinking about it. It gnawed at me, like a secret buried beneath the pages. So, I drove home, my mind swirling, until a thought, an idea, struck me. Without thinking, I turned my mum's car around and headed for the grandest house in town, the mansion that looked like something out of a Gothic novel itself, the home of Julia Erford. I knocked for nearly 10 minutes before she finally answered. She was an old woman, brittle and sharp-eyed, her gaze like ice. When I asked about looking through her collection of old family papers, her eyes lit up in a way that made me uneasy. Mrs. Erford had been hoarding her family's history for years. Letters, journals and papers, some dating back to the 1800s. She refused to give them up to the museum, convinced that greedy monsters would photocopy them to death and sell them to the highest bidder. I didn't care about any of that. I just wanted answers. I sat in her study, surrounded by stacks of crumbling parchment, and as the hours ticked by, I found myself missing the neat card catalogue at the library. The smell was the same, but the air felt heavier here, as if time had decided to settle in these walls. Then I heard the familiar tap of her cane, and the door creaked open. "Find what you were looking for?" she asked, voice as sharp as a needle. "No, not really," I muttered, barely looking up. "Then what on earth is so important that you disturbed my dinner?" I hesitated before answering. I was looking into the Aberforce murder. Her expression shifted at the mention of the name. "Ah, nasty business. My family preferred not to speak of it." I cocked my head, curiosity gnawing at me. "Why?" Her eyes narrowed as she stared me down. "Because the Aberforces were my relatives, child. My family changed their name after the Civil War to avoid the scandal. Erford's what we call ourselves now. For the sake of peace." My heart skipped a beat. "Maggie, she died here?" I asked, my voice low. Her eyes flashed with something cold. "Yes, child." Maggie died in the original farmhouse, which burned down, and this house was built in its place. The Aberforces, they were always here. But the papers said, I stopped myself, not wanting to sound like an idiot. Yes, she interrupted. The papers said Cyril had no family. But there's more to the story. I leaned forward, desperate to understand. My ancestor, Henriette Aberforce, came with her husband to care for Cyril's child after his wife's death. They took the child in, kept it quiet, of course. It was all, well, complicated. Wait, I said, confusion setting in. But Cyril had no children. He didn't have any heirs. Not true, Mrs. Urford snapped. He had a child, a son, born of his affair with a young woman named Beth Smith. She was a nurse, a charity orphan who took care of Maggie in her final years. But the child wasn't born until after Cyril was hanged. I recoiled. That's disgusting. Men are men, she said with a humorless grin. I was reeling. None of this made sense, but still I pressed on. So, the child wasn't a motive for the murder. What was? She let out a sharp breath. The trial story was that Cyril drank too much and lost his head. That's what everyone believed. But why would he kill her? I asked, my mind racing. With a butcher knife? No one would do that in a drunken rage. Mrs. Urford seemed almost tired of the whole thing. The answer lies in the details, but you won't find it here. The story happened almost 200 years ago. I couldn't let it go. Something about it gnawed at me. I just couldn't shake the feeling that Cyril hadn't been guilty. Mrs. Urford went quiet and looked at me with a sharp gleam in her eye. There's one thing left. My cousin Hetty's journal mentions something nobody talks about. I was on the edge of my seat. What does it say? Her voice dropped to a whisper. That Maggie's death wasn't what it seemed, and that if you want the truth, you should look in the old outhouse. I blinked, unsure if I'd heard her correctly. The outhouse? She nodded grimly. You'll find the answers there. The next morning, I was up before the sun. I couldn't stop myself. I had to know. The old house seemed more oppressive now, a weight on my chest as I walked to the backyard, to the decrepit outhouse that looked like something out of a nightmare. The smell hit me the moment I opened the door, a thick, foul stench that made my stomach turn, but I didn't care. I was on a mission. I grabbed a shovel, ignoring the ache in my back as I dug through the rancid soil. I was just about to give up when my shovel struck something hard. My heart raced as I dug deeper, revealing a small metal box. It was locked, but as I cleaned it off, I saw 2 letters carved into the top. M.A. My breath hitched. Minutes later, Mrs. Urford returned with a ring of ancient keys. Try these, she said, voice a hushed murmur. And so, we sat together, fumbling through the keys, until the 28th one clicked open. Inside was a sheaf of papers, bound with leather. I unwrapped them, and my heart pounded as I scanned the pages. Then I saw it, the final entry, dated the day of Maggie's murder. I froze. The words on the page burned into my mind. I've planned it tonight, as that little slut will be gone, so Cyril will take the blame. When he's hanged, hopefully the shock kills his Bathsheba and her spawn of the devil. I exhaled slowly. Maggie Aberforce killed herself, I whispered. Mrs. Urford stared at me, her face pale, her hands trembling. She knew. She knew. I nodded. She knew everything. And then, as if the weight of the past was pressing down on her, Mrs. Urford stood, her voice quiet and calm. The Aberforce and Urford women, we've always done whatever it takes to protect the family name. I recoiled. That's monstrous, I gasped. You would never... Her lips twisted into a thin, almost amused smile. Wouldn't I? And just like that, the air grew colder.